And now I would like to welcome the panelists for the human rights of artisans. And these are, amazing change leaders who are trailblazers. And if I could ask Jasmine, Ursula, Rebecca, there you go, and Rupa, if you could switch on your video. Let me see. I think we're trying to get here. Oh, this is fantastic. Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry for the little bit of delay, and
Not at all.
You get carried away sometimes in these conversations. So great to see India and New York and London. I think Ursula, you're based in London right now. So without much delay, I'm going to let Jasmine take over, and attendees, as mentioned earlier, please send your questions. We will try to answer a few of them, and the rest we will attend to later on. Enjoy the talk.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jasmine Malik Chua. I'm a journalist who writes about sustainability, ethics, and labor in the fashion supply chain. So we're here to talk about human rights for the artisans of the world. We'll have 10 minutes for questions at the end of this panel. So just type in your questions in the Q&A section below, and we'll do our very best to get to them as time allows. So I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panelists. We have Rupa Mehta, President of World Fair Trade Organization. She also leads the Sasha Association for Craft Producers in India. Before that, she served on the board of Fair Trade Forum India and the Asia WFTO board. Rupa completed an economics honors course, followed with an MBA degree from Delhi University. Next, we have Ursula de Castro, known as the Upcycling Queen. Ursula is founder and global creative director of Fashion Revolution, the global coalition of academics, designers, organizations, and key opinion formers who are demanding increased transparency in the fashion value chain. Her career started as a designer with the pioneering upcycling label From Somewhere. Ursula is also associate lecturer at UAL, as well as Central St. Martin's visiting fellow. She just published her first book, Loved Clothes Last. And last but definitely not least, Rebecca Van Bergen. She is the founder and executive director of Nest, a nonprofit bringing transparency, business development, and advocacy to the global artisan community. Rebecca has grown the organization to improve the lives of more than 250,000 artisans since the organization's inception. Rebecca is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, Levi Strauss Collaboratory, and Ashoka Fellow. So welcome all of you, and thank you so much for your time. So I have a bunch of questions, and how we'll do this is that I'll direct a question to one of you, just so we don't have everyone speaking at the same time. And then, after that, feel free to jump in if you have anything else to add, and, let's make this more of a conversation than a Q&A. So Ursula, I'd love to start with you. There is often a very romantic view of artisans. Marketing materials tend to portray them as well-paid and clean, orderly surroundings, working diligently at their craft. How much of a disconnect is there between the way we think they're treated and how they're actually treated?
There's a massive disconnect in the way that we think of artisanal products, full stop. The lives of the artisans are completely hidden from us, as is the supply chain that actually brings the artisanal product to us. I mean, I don't believe that many people know that many of those beautiful embroidery that we think of as made in France or couture are actually made in India. That it's very common for luxury fashion houses to actually subcontract these incredible, incredible skills to people who we will never know who they are. And this in itself is, for me, denies the whole point. I mean, when we talk about artisanal work, particularly which is in the fashion industry, I think of those threads and those threads that bind us, and the fact that we have severed them, and that we don't want to know the hands that make those products, and the fact that the industry has, to a certain extent, severed these threads for us, I find reprehensible. when we talk about artisanal skills, some that are so ancient and that we're losing, it is comparable to the loss of animals, because any loss to its ecosystem is a loss. And so really to reconnect with the people that create this beauty is about reconnecting with ourselves. So one of the things that I've liked the most about the project that we've done at Fashion Revolution was a project that we did with the British Council. And we worked with two designers, one from India, Aratrik, and one from the UK, Bethany, and they both went up to Tripura in the northeast of India to work with scrap loom artisans. And the information that we got from that trip was the opposite to what we were expecting. We went there imagining that we could increase quantities and volumes, and we found that actually these artisans did not want to do that. They just wanted access to clean water. So we went with this super highly romanticized idea that we could, really increment something, only to realize that we were just so much happier to be there and observe and worship and adore. And one of the projects that we did was then to invite people to follow their own artisanal threads, to follow their own family or local traditions as a way to rediscover really who we are. So in a nutshell, I've gone over too long, but no, we don't see them, we don't know them. And I so wish that we could meet to celebrate.
Yeah,
I
Rebecca.
just add something, Jasmine, may I? Yeah, so I think it's what people, the brands would want to pick up, which would appeal to consumers. So it's all about presentation and promotion. And the other thing is, longer the supply chain, the less you would know about the source, or get closeness with the person who's creating what you're creating. And what Ursula said, the co-creation, the collaboration with the designer or with the the merchandising person, that will go directly to the concerned unit to work with the artisans to pick it up. Then they know everything. They know about their living conditions. They know about the agency which the artisans have. And that's what fair trade is about, really. I have to also speak up for this, because that's what I've done for more than 40 years of my life. And I think when you talk human rights, it is about livelihoods, it's about respect, it's about dignity, it's about agency. It's about, respecting the cultural traditions, the indigenous knowledge, anything that a artisan, a woman who's, doing a particular embroidery makes her feel good about herself, that yes, this thing is of value. And I think in the life which I've had, interacting with artisans, you've seen the transformation. So it is the transformative effect which you can have as businesses, as brands, on the lives of the artisans, to give them that value. So I just wanted to add that, because I feel strongly about this point. So thank you for raising it, and thank you, Ursula, for drawing this out so well.
Yeah. So Rebecca, I know a lot of artisanal work tends to be done in the home rather than in a formal factory setting. How much more prone to exploitation are artisans compared with conventional garment factory workers?
I'm just going to build on what Ursula said too, because I think she kicked us off so well. Thank you. I think we at Nest have worked in the artisan space for many years. And as we've seen kind of increasing consumer demand for artisanal and handcrafted goods, which has been, steadily increasing over the last decade or more, which is super exciting. Larger and larger companies are wanting to source with smaller and local manufacturers, which is very exciting. But larger companies have significant risk mitigation and compliance protocols that they need to kind of have see met. And so we started having companies want to come and use kind of their factory monitoring systems and standards inside homes where artisanal workers, or very, very tiny workshops, which are certainly not factories, and seeing, the kind of disconnect of a check the box auditor coming in to assess whether there's fire extinguishers in like a workshop that's made, a makeshift workshop on the side of a home. And so we started a journey about 8 or so years ago, where we worked with a group of brands and retailers to create a standard for what operating in a home workshop or home or a small workshop would look like, that had both buy-in from brands and retailers so that it kind of met their needs from a risk mitigation and transparency perspective, but was also steeply rooted in a worker's perspective. So we did roundtables with actual workers and worker rights organizations, and did a whole lot of kind of piloting and building to make sure that it was a system and a model that was education focused. So really working with producers to understand transparency and why it's important to brands and retailers, and rooted in local context. And so we customize every single set of standards to the location where we're working, so it matches labor law and other things. But I think what's been interesting to me is kind of what Ursula said, which is that there's artisanal workers that we think of, but there's also a significant amount of artisanal labor within our current supply chains that we don't even know is artisanal, and that companies aren't necessarily disclosing as artisanal. So like from seed beading, mass market jewelry, to the applique and embroidery we see in mainstream retailers, those are still women working in their homes with their hands, just like a social enterprise would be, but without the protections and education needed. And so, home-based labor is not protected by labor law in many, many countries, and or the labor laws are very lax and or very different than they would be if you were a salaried worker. And so, part of our standard is about kind of helping the industry. Obviously, ideally, the government has policies that protect home workers, but until that time, we thought it was important that the industry was self-regulating and had the systems to self-regulate to ensure that fair wages were being paid, even if that wasn't legally required in the country where they were operating. And so the program really is about kind of increasing the support, because you can pay. In many countries, you don't have to pay a minimum wage to a home-based worker and be legally compliant, which is crazy. So the exploitation that's possible in a home is obviously significantly higher than in a factory where there's regulation and oversight and people seeing what's happening. And it's terrible there. So if it's terrible there, it gets much worse when you lose transparency.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to build on that, Rupa, we tend to have a very paternalistic idea of what artisans need, but how can artisans better advocate for themselves and tell us what they need? What rights do artisans and artisanal home workers have that they need to be aware of, even in these unregulated settings?
Unregulated settings, I think it depends on how much awareness there is in the artisans communities. See, for home-based workers particularly, the exposure is so limited that they are very, very vulnerable. But to get artisans to articulate what they need, it requires some intervention. It requires there is strength in numbers. So when say, Nest would step in with their system, or fair trade, WFTO would step in, or any fair trade or social enterprise, or a social, and which is talking about social and environment impact businesses, when they are working, it is about numbers, as I said, but more importantly, about the kind of relationships that you're building with the artisans. So and it requires the emergence of leaders. So you don't talk to a whole group together, but the time really is, you see the most impact when you see a leader who or an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur, or an entrepreneur who's also driven by creating wealth, abundance in that community. But that is all that is required. And then when you bring in other members of your community into that conversation, and you're interacting with agencies, units, social enterprises outside your sphere, then the change begins to happen. So it is a process, and I think people are getting very conscious of it, because I think the consumers are asking for it. I mean, they're very obvious global issues which are concerning young consumers, conscious consumers. They're talking about, of course, the environment, which is foremost, but also about the great, the disparity in incomes and poverty, and about the cultural heritage, etc. A lot of what Vandana said in her keynote address. So once artisan gives value to themselves, and which happens, as I said, is there's no one single factor, there's no magic wand, but yes, it is a process. It is a process, and I think there are in number of people, like Vandana talks about how she can do the storytelling, creating consciousness. And I know with Rebecca, I know about Ursula's work, and there's so many, and Sriya I see is one of the panelists, Aika. So, there are many of such social initiatives that are taking on this responsibility to create that. And there is, I'm taking a little longer because this is so close to my heart, because in these years, I've seen people transformed. I've seen, women who were scared to even step out of their home, going to exhibitions in Edinburgh and so on. So and I'm sure Sriya would have a lot to say if she could enter this conversation, but I've seen that the transformative, quality of the intervention, of the kind of intervention. I'm so sorry I take so much time over everything I say, but, it's just that. It's just that. So it is, and they're so precious. I don't want to be patronizing at all, but, I think in my journey, I've been so enriched by the association with artisans and their whole world and the whole ecosystem. And so much of what Vandana said resonated with me, because we don't talk about it, because when we're talking fair trade, we're talking about business and social and environment impact, etc. But these are the kind of also emotions which inform our work. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Rebecca or Ursula, did you want to add anything to that?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, this emotionality is incredibly important, and it's what really elevates the artisan, in every possible way. I mean, we've got it in our culture. I mean, in my memory, I remember I come from Venice, so close enough to where they made the most incredible lace, and this kind of correlation, this imagery of women sitting outside their homes with their threads in their hands while simultaneously checking that the pasta wasn't getting scotta and that the kids were somehow, and there's this richness. What reconnects us all to who we are, really. It's kind of historical, prehistorical, and different everywhere we go. And this, to me, is the power of our differences, really, that our tools are dictated by the soil in which the materials with which we make them are grown. Our capacities, our signature is dependent on the colors that we can dye from the plants that are grown in that area, our understanding and our story. So this interconnection is really the one that signifies to me the interconnectedness between people and planet. It's all in that thread.
Great. So Ursula, here's another question for you. So whose responsibility is it to uplift artisans? Is it, the unions? Is it the brands? Or should governments be playing a stronger role in developing policies? How do we prevent artisans from falling through the cracks?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I'm probably not the best person to speak about this because I come from such a sort of creative, emotional. This would be a head of policy, Sarah, who would be able to reply with all of the right answer. What I can tell you is that I believe firmly, first of all, it is governments, because government dictate the law, but the law is also made by business and by people. I've said this before, and I've written it on a piece, for CNN recently, but there is one technology, that one innovation that doesn't require technology we haven't tried, and that's to treat each other as equals. And if we had that ingrained in our humanity, we probably wouldn't be where we are now. And I feel that with artisans, and this is coming from Italy, in a land where there are many, the fashion industry has been profoundly culpable of turning this beauty into something that we then called ethnic, in inverted commas, like it was slightly dirty, like it was slightly not quite up to standard. And this is an aesthetic, a visual bastardization of something that has happened repeatedly in the kind of high fashion over the last 30, 40 years. It's only now that we are returning to the comfort of the human mistake, the human error, which is exactly what makes luxury. See, I don't understand how luxury can call itself luxury if it isn't 100% traceable, every hand visible. And I feel that it is a shared responsibility, because of course it's government, but my God, it's also brands. And therefore it's also people demanding that those brands comply. So right now there's not one main sector, and we all need to act together to really, really protect these skills, because they are our global heritage, 100%. They are, our humanity is mirrored in there.
Rebecca or Rupa, anything to add?
Just say I couldn't agree with Ursula more, because in the sense that it's the entire ecosystem. Maybe on the forefront would be social enterprises, people or designers, everyone who's engaging directly with artisans, and then sort of, getting them to be empowered or enabled, whichever word you choose. But the governments have a role to play, the brands have a role to play, and that's and of course social enterprises, whatever, of course they do. But then everything has to work together for larger impact. Let me put it that way. And I agree that with government, you can have all the policies in the world, and to dodge those policies is not a problem. I mean, I'm a unit, and I have everything TikTok in my unit, but you subcontract XYZ, who's going to follow that? So, this is a very complex issue. And the fact is that the minute that there is a certain consciousness which is growing. And I think during this COVID-19 period and post that, I think it's brought out our humanity. Somehow people might want to buy less, but they want to buy less, but they want to buy quality, where they can trace where it's coming from, the impact of their purchase on the lives of people who've created, and that there is a consciousness. The other thing, I'll take us, because if you ask me a question, I don't stop easily. So the other thing that people who are at home, all of us were at home. We were, for periods of time, and with very little else to do than, just Google or get in, your podcasts and XYZ. And you saw more and more people communicating or just getting information of this kind. So even I feel the awareness of it, awareness of what when we talk environment, when we talk social impact, then what it really means. And each one has a need, has that agency to transform, to make that change, to contribute. And very often people don't know where to contribute, what to do. And so it's like I said again, and I end this with it, that it is an entire ecosystem. So you can't take away any of the parts. We all have to work together. So Ursula is relevant, Rebecca, Sasha, WFTO, ICA, and so many others who are here. And of course, at the heart of it is the artisan communities themselves, and how quickly they pick up. At least in my experience, I've seen how responsive they are to any kind of change which you want to bring in their situation and for their future generations. So, yeah.
One more thing to that, if that's okay. I think one of the other things that we're super passionate about is that I think the artisan sector has been so misunderstood, and also we think of this as a gender equity problem, but you look at the amount of philanthropy and impact investment capital and support that sectors like agriculture are receiving, or health services, or technology, and it's significant. And then you think about major philanthropy playing in the artisan sector, and it's non-existent. It just doesn't happen. And largely because artisans and home-based workers are women. And so they don't see it as a major economic driver for women or for supply chains. Nationally or globally. And I think it's a real problem. And I think, one of the things we just, like, for our own knowledge, downloaded the 990s, which is how you report if you're a philanthropic institution, you're giving to the government, and you have to disclose who you're funding. And so we went through, and 0.05% of the funding went to the artisan sector. And some estimates suggest that it's the second largest employer of women around the world. And 0.05% of major philanthropy is going to the development of our sector. And so I think it's really important that we start changing the narrative that the artisan sector is scalable. It's already employing people, and it's a major economic driver for women. And so if we want to have conversations around gender equity and the future of work, to ignore our sector is, I mean, you can see me getting heated. It's incredibly problematic to me and to so many others. And so I think we need more players at the table, and we need more players at the table who take the sector seriously. And that takes all of us to get there. That takes government, that takes industry, that takes worker rights organizations, that takes all of us. But I think that we have to have a reckoning about the importance of value of artisan work in our time.
Yeah, so Rebecca, this cues up my next question really well. The ILO says that women have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. So how has COVID-19 really impacted the artisan community?
Sure. I mean, we did kind of, last year, we sort of scrapped a lot of our core work at Nest and really put a lot towards COVID impact. And we have a global artisan community, which we call our guild, which has a footprint in 115 countries and close to 2,000 SME businesses that are part of it. It's free to join. So any artisan business should definitely join. All of the resources we provide are free and all designed to help scale artisanal production. But we did surveying and found out that 80% of production had stopped for our guild members last year. 68% of future orders had been canceled, even if they were already in production. So the artisan businesses were losing all of the kind of raw materials and investments they had put in. 71% of our businesses had to pause or terminate artisan workers. There was an estimated 9 million, give or take, in monetary loss of canceled orders. So it's just, just so significant what we were seeing happen. Ooh. Did I? And so I thought I had lost sound for a second, but I didn't. And so we really mobilized. And one of the things we saw was that because our workforce was home-based, even when global lockdowns were happening on factories, our workers were still able to produce. And so we did a rapid fundraising campaign and raised money to have our artisan businesses make PPE that we then donated to the United States Postal Service and New York City Public Housing. We donated in 18 countries, 47 hospitals. And it was so exciting to see the resilience of home-based labor, even in light of a global pandemic, and even when they were being the most hard hit in terms of economics and health. And so, I think there's nothing positive about the global pandemic and the loss of life that we've seen all over the world because of it. But I do think it has shown the resilience of home-based labor and awakened eyes around that type of labor and the protections that are needed for home-based laborers in our country and around the world. So I do think that's hopefully a change that will sustain post-pandemic. But obviously small and micro businesses are at the front line and will be for quite some time. And so relief is going to be necessary for not the short term, but for the long term. And I think we need to think of it less as relief and more as kind of creating a new normal for business.
Yeah, perfect. So we're going to go to Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them right now. So Rupa, this question is from Mohua. He says, hello, how can people like myself who are not directly meeting the artisans promote their work?
No, just could you repeat that question? I didn't quite get it, but
the question is how can people like myself, like this attendee, who are not directly meeting the artisans, how can they promote their work?
Well, they can try, they can buy, for one, they can buy, and then also get in touch with organizations and initiatives. That's one way of doing it. And if there's any part of your work that you feel that can leverage this, because there's no one answer for this, you have to look at least I don't have a single answer, but where you are placed, you'd probably, I would like to know where the person is placed right now, Mahua, and you'll have to search, maybe Google search, to see if there are organizations that are working with artisans, or there are individual artisans who are running their own enterprise or cooperative or whatever. Like, I think that is probably the easiest way to get in touch with artisans and see how they can help. or at least, work with, build some sort of a relationship with them. Yes.
Yeah, Rebecca, Ursula, anything you wanted to add?
Well, I'd like to sort of turn the question a little bit as well, because, when we talk about artisanals and artisans, we imagine immediately, we connect with the past. We connect with something that is already existing. But I'd like to say that we can think of inventing new. I mean, we also need to support the artisans of tomorrow. And if I can bring my experience as a mentor of young fashion brands, I am discovering that the majority of young emerging talents now, that's what they want to be. They want to be an artisan, at least when they describe it. This is what it looks like. They're not imagining that after their, studies or travels or whatever it inspired them to come into this world, they don't really want to be Prada. They have a totally different narrative, which is the little bottega on the street with a bespoke and the making. And when I look at upcycling, for instance, which is what many of the brands I mentor do, I mean, that could be gigantified to involve so many other communities, picking up waste and textile waste and turning it into something else. So there is also a way of supporting new crafts that haven't yet happened by believing in them. Because it's not just about the actual thing that the artisans are producing. What's important is the sense of community, of people working together, joining forces to do something which is purposeful as well as beautiful. That to me is the concept. So if you are that way inclined, then the world, as I wrote in my book, is the most incredibly brilliant minestrone, because there is so much that you can find out, whether it's local or whether it's global. So it's thinking of artisans as a forever. They've always been with us and they will always be with us. So we also need to be imaginative in imagining what their future will be like.
Can I add to that? I know you probably want to get to another question, but that's so brilliant what she just said. And I think one of the things we're really interested in is, we just launched a program at Nest with a community of quilters in the United States called the Geesben Quilters, who are descendants of slaves in rural Alabama. And they made quilts out of what they had on hand, old rags and grain sacks and, and they were incredibly modern and beautiful and are now sitting in art galleries all around the world. But I think that we think of these things like upcycling as new and hip, and no, people have been doing this for centuries, and that's how craft was born. And
I'm volunteering.
Totally.
I'm volunteering for that project. I don't care what you do. I'm volunteering for that project. I'm coming. I mean,
okay. I love that. But I think, and then we see companies like Patagonia and others talking about repair and building out models, in the Hermes luxury stores, they have an artisan working to repair your bags, and they call him or her an artisan because they are. And so if we think about these new models of repair, reuse, longevity, artisans are the workforce for that. They always have been. And it originated with them. And so I think there's so much about kind of on the recycling, upcycling, less production side, that artisan doesn't have to mean new production, more goods into the world, which I think is important to call out, which I loved that Ursula raised.
Yeah, and I have a question from Allison Guzman. I think this is perfect for Ursula. How do we transition into a society supporting healthy global linkages that benefit artisans without having to throw away or get rid of the immense quantities of low-quality plastic-based garments? How do we support artisans without polluting the environment by throwing away?
Okay, so that to me, it's two questions. The first one is the fact that, frankly, I don't give a damn if things are badly made or called to be badly made. I mean, the worse they're made, the simpler they're going to be to repair. So that argument for me is obsolete. That the 150 billion garments of clothing that we produce apparently yearly, that we consider that to be so bad quality that it's not worth mending, but we have to throw it away. That argument is obsolete. That argument is wrong. That argument is disrespectful to the people who make our clothes, disrespectful to the landfills who aren't, frankly, in the back of our yard. They're in the back of other people's yards that we've already culturally depleted for centuries. So we're inflicting damage just by thinking that things cannot be repaired. And again, how do we the concept of, I've never met a community of artisans, and I have visited a few that didn't also have their own little system for recuperating whatever else was left and wasted. I mean, if you're working within creativity, a community, and common sense, everything has value. Each other, waste, nothing is here extemporarily. Everything is permanent. Our relationships with nature and our relationships with people. So, this is what I would recommend. This is what I would say, that we already have all of the resources that we need, and we already have many of the wisdoms that we've already used and employed. And it is about, understanding that we need to reintroduce care, respect, and common sense in these relationships in order to value them. And that value ultimately is what elevates. It's treating each other as equals that elevates us as individuals.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. So I've been told that I need to wrap up. So let's end with success stories, to end on a positive note. So I would love, for each of you to share a success story. How far have we come in the past 5 years regarding, fair wages and fair practices? What are some of the best practices that you've witnessed or helped shepherd that the artisanal community can adopt at a greater scale? Let's start with Rupa.
I want to just read out some statistics, because I think that will have the impact. Otherwise, there are just too many words. Now, I'm talking about Fair Trade Organization, WFTO members, where a study was done. So 92% reinvest all profits in their social mission. And the social mission is about living and fair wage, dignity, good working conditions, etc., etc. I think people are familiar with fair trade values and principles. 52% of the enterprises are led by women. They are 4 times less likely to go bankrupt, maybe because they take lesser risks, and or they are conscious about how much is spent, or they just manage their businesses well. 85% actively sacrificing financial goals to pursue social and environmental goals while retaining commercial viability. So that was an impressive fact. And then finally, 52% women are on the boards of these enterprises, as against 8% in conventional trade. Then 54% women are CEOs, and against 51% in conventional trade. So I think these statistics speak for themselves, that we have in this journey with fair trade, we have made considerable social and environment impact, as well as we've improved the livelihoods of many of our artisans, members of these social enterprises, and there's more to look forward to. Yes.
Yeah, Ursula, if you want to go next, I know you have to run somewhere soon.
I do. I mean, I wish I could stay here. I have a director's budget meeting, which I tell you, I could stay here all day. But yes, sorry to be self-promoting, but my best examples are the emerging designers that I have the honor and the pleasure to mentor, and our initiative, our Fashion Revolution initiative called Fashion Open Studio, which really does work with young, tiny designers all over the world. And I can't tell you how many have followed their thread to discover their local communities and how committed they are to working together. Not just together with their own communities, but together as a cohort. So there's like skipping and chatting and communication happening from one place to the next. And that to me is really what we need to look for, because at the end of the day, this is choice. Brands tell us that millions of runs of the same thing, that's choice. That's not choice. Choice is the alternative. Choice is for somebody to be able to discover all of these realities in their gorgeous regional dialect. Choice is to be able to support, something that you never discovered before, to save your money for something of value and to have it visible to you. And I'm proud of the younger generation who is consistently and so deliberately joining hands making teams, making groups, because we don't need to see the power of the individual. We really do need to see the power, as Rupa was saying before, you know, the power of numbers. There's safety in numbers.
And Rebecca, yourself?
Sure. I mean, there's so many amazing stories of artisanal makers in our community. It's hard to pick stories to share. But I do think I've also seen a bunch of questions kind of about how to toe into this work if you're a new brand or if you're an artisan producer. And so obviously I think the three of us are more than welcome to take inquiries or emails, you know, post conversation. And I think that if you're a newer brand or designer, I think there's really easy ways to piggyback on work that's being done in the sector already if you don't have the resources necessarily to put into it. And so, you know, our compliance program carries a NEST seal of ethical handcraft. The businesses have already been through the entire program. They already carry the seal. There's not investment in auditing necessarily needed to source from those businesses that have done it. So I think there's really kind of easy ways as new companies and new designers want to support these initiatives that they can get plugged in. So I would encourage people to reach out to us on that. I know Ursula has a lot of mentorship programs along those lines too. And then I think for artisan businesses, I think the cost of certification models is expensive. And so I think the most important, you know, we open source to all of our artisan producers, all of the toolkits and everything we would need to become compliant with the NEST standard. And so I think there's really easy ways to start towing into some things that aren't prohibitive for small brands or for artisan enterprises. I feel like that's also a myth that sort of just needs to be dispelled, because I think it's important that the democratization of all of these issues needs to happen. And so it needs to be accessible for everybody. These can't be elite issues for huge corporations or for luxury brands. It has to be something, it's a movement for all of us. And I think that's super important. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. We've come to the end of our panel, and I'm going to thank you so much for our panelists, and I'm going to send you all back to Saloni.
Yes, this was wonderful. And honestly, I think next time I'm going to keep an hour for this. I love you all, so inspired. And we're getting a lot of messages here, sharing their emotions as well, that you all are making a big difference in their journey as well. So thank you. And let's keep in touch. We will share this recording with you all in the coming days. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this lovely panel.
Thank you, Ursula. Bye. Have a good one.
Bye, Rebecca. Bye, Ursula.
Bye-bye. So lovely to have been here.